Welcome back to Lore 2 RPG, where we dive deep into gaming's greatest stories. Today, we journey into the blood-soaked streets of Yharnam to explore one of Bloodborne's most tragic and pivotal figures, Laurence, the First Vicar. Over the next couple hours, we'll uncover the rise and fall of the man who founded the healing church, trace his transformation from idealistic scholar to monstrous beast, and examine how his choices shaped the nightmare that consumed an entire city. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin this epic adventure together into the gothic horror of FromSoftware's masterpiece. Chapter 1. The Scholar of Byrgenwerth. In the halls of Byrgenwerth, where scholars gathered to push the boundaries of human knowledge, there walked a young man whose ambitions would reshape the world. Laurence was not merely another student among the academic ranks. He was one of Master Willem's most promising disciples, a brilliant mind drawn to the cosmic mysteries that lay hidden beneath the earth. Byrgenwerth College stood as a beacon of learning in those early days, its scholars dedicated to understanding the nature of existence itself. Under the guidance of Provost Willem, these men of learning pursued knowledge through archaeology, astronomy, and the exploration of ancient ruins. It was an institution that valued discovery above all else, where the phrase, "seek pale blood to transcend the hunt," would one day echo through abandoned halls. Master Willem, the revered head of this academy, taught his students to look beyond the limitations of human perception. He encouraged them to seek enlightenment through insight, to develop what he called eyes on the inside, a form of understanding that could perceive the cosmic truths hidden from ordinary sight. Willem's philosophy centered on the belief that humanity could transcend its mortal boundaries through knowledge and communion with higher beings, entities he called Great Ones. Among Willem's many students, Laurence stood apart for his passion and his different interpretation of their discoveries. While Willem preached caution and reverence for the mysteries they uncovered, Laurence saw opportunity where his master saw danger. This fundamental difference in perspective would eventually drive a wedge between teacher and student, leading to what many scholars now call the Great Schism of Byrgenwerth. The relationship between Willem and Laurence was complex, built on mutual respect, yet strained by philosophical disagreements. Willem viewed Laurence almost as a son, which made the young man's eventual departure all the more painful. In later years, when Willem spoke of Laurence's decision to leave Byrgenwerth, he would use the word betrayal, a testament to how deeply the split wounded the old scholar. Laurence was not alone in his questioning of Willem's methods. Among his contemporaries were other ambitious minds who would go on to shape Yharnam's future in their own ways. Mikolash, who would later found the School of Mensis, shared Laurence's belief that more direct action was needed to achieve transcendence. Gehrman, who would become the first hunter, brought a practical warrior's perspective to their theoretical discussions. These men formed a circle of scholars united by their desire to push beyond Willem's more conservative approach. The turning point came with the discovery of the old blood. Deep within the tombs carved beneath Yharnam by the ancient Thumerian civilization, Byrgenwerth scholars uncovered something that would change everything. This blood, described as a holy medium in the ancient texts, possessed remarkable properties that seemed to offer everything Laurence had dreamed of: healing, enhancement of human capabilities, and possibly even the key to transcendence itself. Willem's reaction to the old blood was immediate and visceral. Despite its obvious potential, he sensed something dangerous about this crimson substance. His warnings to his students were clear and uncompromising. Fear the old blood. These 4 words would become the defining adage of Byrgenwerth, a warning that Willem desperately hoped his students would heed. But Laurence saw something different when he looked upon the old blood. Where Willem saw danger, Laurence saw salvation. Where his master counseled fear, Laurence felt hope. The blood's healing properties were undeniable. It could cure diseases, mend wounds, and grant strength to those who consumed it. To Laurence, This seemed like divine providence, a gift from the cosmos intended to elevate humanity to new heights. The debates between master and student grew more heated with each passing day. Willem spoke of ancient civilizations that had fallen to similar temptations, of ruins that told stories of hubris and downfall. He pointed to the fate of the Thumerians themselves, once mighty builders who had delved too deep into cosmic mysteries and paid the ultimate price. But Laurence was young, ambitious, and utterly convinced that he could succeed where others had failed. The final conversation between Willem and Laurence has been preserved, echoing through the ages like a cautionary tale. When Laurence announced his intention to leave Byrgenwerth and pursue his own path with the Old Blood, Willem accused him of betrayal. The young scholar's response was measured but firm. "No, but you will never listen. I tell you, I will not forget our adage." These words, preserved in the memory that lives within Laurence's skull, show us a man trying to balance respect for his master with conviction in his own beliefs. Laurence promised Willem that he would remember the warning to fear the Old Blood, that he would proceed with caution even as he pursued its potential. But even as he spoke these words, both men must have sensed that this promise would prove impossible to keep. The lure of the blood was too strong, its benefits too obvious, and Laurence's vision too grand to be constrained by fear. When Laurence finally departed Byrgenwerth, he did not go alone. Several like-minded scholars chose to follow him, forming the core of what would become the Healing Church. Among them were individuals who would play crucial roles in the dark events to come: researchers, administrators, and eventually hunters who would carry out the church's will in the years ahead. The young man who left Byrgenwerth was full of hope and determination. He believed he could harness the power of the Old Blood while avoiding its dangers. He envisioned a future where disease and suffering would be eliminated, where humanity would evolve beyond its current limitations through the careful application of blood ministration. Laurence saw himself not as a rebel against his master's teachings, but as their natural continuation, a student who had learned to think beyond his teacher's fears. What Laurence could not have foreseen was how completely his noble intentions would be corrupted by the very forces he sought to control. The path from idealistic scholar to founding father of a religious institution would prove more treacherous than any young academic could imagine. The Old Blood, which seemed so promising in those early days, carried within it seeds of transformation that would ultimately consume not just Laurence himself, but the entire city he sought to save. As Laurence made his way toward Yharnam to begin his great work, Willem remained behind at Byrgenwerth, sitting by the lake in his ornate chair, gazing at the moon and perhaps sensing the tragedy that was to come. The old scholar would maintain his vigil for years to come, hoping against hope that his former student would remember the adage that had bound them together. But the wheels of fate were already in motion, and neither master nor student could foresee the full extent of the horror that Laurence's ambitions would unleash upon the world. Chapter 2. The Foundation of Faith. The city of Yharnam in those early days was a place ripe for transformation. Built above the ancient Thumerian ruins that honeycombed the earth beneath, it was a settlement that seemed destined for greatness, or perhaps for something far more sinister. When Laurence arrived with his followers, he found a community ready to embrace new ideas, new solutions to age-old problems of suffering and mortality. The establishment of the Healing Church did not happen overnight. Laurence understood that introducing revolutionary concepts like blood ministration required careful preparation and gradual acceptance. He began slowly, establishing himself and his fellow scholars as learned men dedicated to the advancement of human welfare. They presented themselves not as radicals or revolutionaries, but as healers and teachers guided by divine inspiration. The initial response to Laurence's teachings was cautious, but curious. The people of Yharnam had long struggled with disease, injury, and the general hardships of medieval life. When strange rumors began circulating about miraculous healings performed by the new scholars, interest grew quickly. Laurence was careful to document these early successes, building a foundation of evidence that would support the Church's claims of divine mandate. The name Healing Church itself was deliberately chosen to emphasize the organization's benevolent mission. Laurence understood the power of religious authority in medieval society, and he crafted his new institution to appeal both to spiritual yearnings and practical needs. The Church would offer not just physical healing, but spiritual guidance and social structure to those who embraced its teachings. As the first vicar of this new religious order, Laurence wielded considerable influence. His title was not merely ceremonial, it represented genuine spiritual and temporal authority over a growing congregation of believers. The position of vicar carried with it the responsibility of interpreting doctrine, administering sacraments, and guiding the faithful in their daily lives. Laurence took these responsibilities seriously, seeing himself as a shepherd leading humanity toward a brighter future. The cornerstone of the Healing Church's appeal was, of course, blood ministration. This practice, derived from Laurence's research into the old blood, involved the careful administration of specially prepared blood to patients suffering from various ailments. The results were often dramatic and seemingly miraculous. Wounds healed rapidly, diseases were cured, and recipients often reported feeling stronger and more vital than ever before. Laurence was meticulous in his approach to blood ministration, at least in the beginning. He understood that the practice needed to appear both scientific and sacred to gain widespread acceptance. The Church developed elaborate rituals around the administration of the blood, complete with prayers, ceremonial vessels, and careful documentation of results. These practices served multiple purposes. They lent gravity and reverence to the proceedings, while also allowing Laurence to monitor the effects of his treatments. The success of blood ministration in these early days cannot be overstated. People who had been written off as incurably ill found themselves restored to health. Injuries that should have taken months to heal were mended in days. Word of these miracles spread throughout Yharnam and beyond, drawing pilgrims and patients from distant lands. The Healing Church quickly became the most sought-after source of medical treatment in the known world. But the Church's influence extended far beyond mere healing. Laurence recognized that to truly transform society, his organization needed to address all aspects of human existence. The Church began offering education, social services, and spiritual guidance to anyone who sought their help. They established schools, charitable institutions, and centers of learning that rivaled even Byrgenwerth in their scope and ambition. The Grand Cathedral, which would eventually become the seat of the Church's power, began as a modest structure dedicated to worship and healing. Under Laurence's guidance, it grew into an imposing monument to the Church's success and influence. The cathedral's architecture was designed to inspire awe and reverence, with soaring spires and magnificent stained glass windows that depicted scenes of healing and transcendence. Within the cathedral's walls, Laurence established the altar that would become central to the Church's worship practices. This sacred space was where the most important blood ministration ceremonies took place, where new members were initiated into the faith, and where Laurence himself would deliver sermons about the divine nature of the old blood. The altar was also where, in later years, Laurence's own skull would be placed as an object of veneration. Though at this point in our story, such dark turns were still unimaginable. The Church's hierarchy developed organically as its influence grew. Below Laurence, as first vicar, were various ranks of clergy, each with specific responsibilities and privileges. The black-garbed hunters, who would later become infamous, were, in these early days, simply protectors and investigators who ensured the safety of Church operations. The white-garbed doctors represented the scientific side of the Church's mission, continuing Laurence's research into blood ministration and its applications. At the highest levels of the Church hierarchy would eventually emerge the choir, a select group of scholars dedicated to understanding the cosmic implications of their work. These individuals, many of whom had followed Laurence from Byrgenwerth, pursued research into the Great Ones and the nature of transcendence itself. Their work would prove crucial to the Church's later development, though it would also contribute to its eventual corruption. The relationship between the healing Church and the broader community of Yharnam was complex and evolving. Initially, the Church positioned itself as a supplement to existing social structures rather than a replacement for them. Laurence was careful not to appear to be challenging secular authority directly, instead focusing on areas where his organization could provide unique value, namely medical treatment and spiritual guidance. However, as the Church's success and influence grew, it inevitably began to challenge existing power structures. Traditional healers found themselves increasingly irrelevant in the face of blood ministration's effectiveness. Religious leaders from other faiths struggled to compete with the Church's tangible miracles. Local authorities discovered that more and more of their citizens looked to the Church for guidance and support. Laurence navigated these challenges with considerable political skill. He forged alliances with influential figures in Yharnam's government and nobility, often providing healing services to secure their support. He was careful to frame the Church's growing power as a natural evolution rather than a hostile takeover, emphasizing cooperation and mutual benefit wherever possible. The economic impact of the healing Church was also significant. The influx of pilgrims seeking healing brought considerable wealth to Yharnam, transforming it from a modest settlement into a major center of commerce and culture. The Church itself became one of the city's largest employers, providing work for everyone from scholars and doctors to craftsmen and laborers. This economic transformation helped cement the Church's position in Yharnam society and made opposition to its influence increasingly difficult. During this period of growth and success, Laurence must have felt vindicated in his decision to leave Byrgenwerth. His vision of using the old blood to benefit humanity appeared to be succeeding beyond his wildest dreams. The suffering that blood ministration alleviated, the lives it saved, and the hope it provided seemed to justify any risks or concerns his former master might have raised. Yet even in these triumphant early days, there were subtle signs of the dangers to come. Some patients who received blood ministration reported strange dreams or visions. Others described feeling unusually aggressive or experiencing cravings they couldn't explain. These side effects were rare and generally mild, easily dismissed as temporary adjustments to the treatment. Laurence and his colleagues noted these phenomena, but concluded they were acceptable trade-offs for the blood's remarkable benefits. The transformation of Yharnam under the healing Church's influence was profound and seemingly positive. Disease rates plummeted, the population grew healthier and more prosperous, and the city became known throughout the land as a place where miracles were commonplace. Laurence had achieved his goal of using the old blood to improve human existence, and his success seemed to prove that Willem's warnings had been unnecessarily cautious. But beneath the surface of this apparent paradise, deeper changes were taking place. The old blood was beginning to work its subtle influence on those who consumed it regularly. Physical changes were minimal at first: enhanced strength, improved healing, increased vitality. Mental changes were even more gradual. Slight shifts in temperament, new urges and desires, altered perceptions of reality. Most importantly, the blood was beginning to establish connections between its recipients and the cosmic forces that had created it. These connections would eventually grow strong enough to allow influence from entities that existed beyond human understanding. The Great Ones, those alien intelligences that Willem had warned against, were beginning to take notice of Yharnam and its transformed inhabitants. As Laurence continued his work as First Vicar, establishing the doctrines and practices that would define the healing Church for generations to come, he remained unaware of these deeper implications. His focus was on the immediate benefits of blood ministration and the growth of his religious organization. The idea that his greatest success might also contain the seeds of ultimate failure would have seemed impossible to the confident young leader who had transformed from scholar to vicar to, in effect, the spiritual ruler of Yharnam. The foundation of the healing church represents one of those pivotal moments in history where good intentions, brilliant innovation, and tragic hubris combine to set in motion events that will echo through generations. Laurence's achievement in creating a functioning religious and medical institution was remarkable by any measure. His use of the old blood to alleviate suffering was, at least initially, genuinely beneficial to thousands of people. Yet the very success of these early years would make the horrors to come all the more devastating. The more completely Yharnam embraced the healing church and its blood ministration, the more thoroughly the city became dependent on forces beyond human control. Laurence had opened a door that he believed led to paradise, but he had unknowingly invited something far more dangerous into his carefully constructed world. Chapter 3: The Hunter's Workshop and Ludwig's Legacy. As the healing church grew in power and influence, it inevitably encountered challenges that required more than just medical expertise and spiritual guidance to address. The old blood, for all its beneficial properties, occasionally produced effects that were less than desirable. Some recipients of blood ministration underwent changes that went beyond simple healing. They became stronger, yes, but also more aggressive, more volatile, and in rare cases, genuinely dangerous to themselves and others. It was in response to these challenges that Laurence made one of his most consequential decisions: the establishment of the Hunter's Workshop. This institution, while nominally separate from the healing church, was created under Laurence's direct influence and served as the church's martial arm. The workshop would be responsible for dealing with any problems that arose from blood ministration, protecting church interests, and exploring the more dangerous applications of their research. The choice of leadership for this new institution was crucial, and Laurence turned to someone he had known since his days at Byrgenwerth: Yharnam. The future First Hunter had been among the scholars who followed Laurence from Willem's academy, but his interests had always tended toward the practical, rather than the theoretical. Where other former Byrgenwerth students focused on research and administration, Yharnam possessed both the martial skills and the practical wisdom necessary to handle the church's security needs. Yharnam's appointment as the head of the Hunter's Workshop represented a significant evolution in the relationship between the healing church and the broader community. No longer was the church simply a benevolent organization focused on healing and spiritual guidance. With the establishment of the workshop, it gained the capacity for violence and coercion, the ability to protect its interests through force when necessary. The early hunters recruited by Yharnam were a diverse group, drawn from various backgrounds, but united by their physical capabilities and their willingness to serve the church's needs. Some were former soldiers or mercenaries attracted by steady employment and the promise of enhancement through blood ministration. Others were idealistic young people who genuinely believed in the church's mission and wanted to contribute to its success. Still others were scholars or intellectuals who saw hunting as a form of applied research, a way to study the effects of the old blood in extreme circumstances. The Hunter's Workshop quickly developed its own culture and traditions. Yharnam, drawing on his experiences at Byrgenwerth and his natural talent for leadership, created an institution that combined military discipline with scholarly inquiry. Hunters were expected not just to be effective fighters, but also careful observers who could report on the effects of blood ministration and the behavior of those who had been transformed by it. The workshop's early missions were relatively straightforward. Hunters were dispatched to deal with individuals who had reacted poorly to blood ministration, suffering what the church diplomatically termed adverse effects. These cases were rare in the beginning, and usually involved people who had become unnaturally aggressive or had suffered some form of mental breakdown following treatment. The hunter's role was to subdue these individuals, study their condition, and determine whether they could be helped or needed to be permanently contained. During this period, the hunters were generally viewed positively by the people of Yharnam. They were seen as protectors and problem solvers. The church's response to the few negative consequences of an otherwise miraculous medical breakthrough. Their presence was reassuring rather than threatening, evidence that the church took its responsibilities seriously and was prepared to address any issues that might arise. The transformation of the Hunters' Workshop from a small security force into a major institution began with the recruitment of Ludwig. Unlike the workshop's earlier members, Ludwig came to hunting with a unique combination of martial excellence, scholarly background, and genuine spiritual devotion. He was not just effective at his duties, he was inspired by them, seeing his role as a hunter as a sacred calling rather than simply a job. Ludwig's background as a cleric provided him with a perspective that complemented Gehrman's more practical approach. Where the first hunter focused on effectiveness and efficiency, Ludwig emphasized the moral and spiritual dimensions of their work. He developed elaborate philosophies around the hunt, treating it as a form of worship and a means of serving the greater good. This ideological framework proved attractive to many recruits and helped establish hunting as a noble profession rather than a necessary evil. Under Ludwig's influence, the Hunters' Workshop began to expand its mission beyond simply dealing with adverse reactions to blood ministration. Hunters started to patrol the streets of Yharnam, maintaining order and providing security for church operations. They investigated reports of unusual activity, protected church officials during their travels, and served as a visible reminder of the church's power and authority. The relationship between Ludwig and Laurence during this period was complex and important. Both men were former Byrgenwerth scholars who had followed different paths in their service to the church. Laurence had focused on administration, theology, and the development of blood ministration techniques. Ludwig had found his calling in the more physical aspects of the church's mission, yet both shared a fundamental belief in the righteousness of their cause and the benefits that the old blood could bring to humanity. Laurence's decision to eventually appoint Ludwig as the head of the church's hunting operations represented a significant evolution in the organization's structure. With this appointment, the Hunters' Workshop became more fully integrated into the church hierarchy, and Ludwig became one of the most powerful figures in Yharnam. His influence extended beyond just military matters to encompass questions of doctrine, policy, and the church's relationship with the broader community. The period of Ludwig's ascendancy was marked by significant expansion in the church's activities. No longer content to simply provide healing services to those who sought them out, the church began to actively promote blood ministration throughout Yharnam and beyond. Hunters served as both protectors and evangelists, spreading word of the blood's benefits while also ensuring that church operations could proceed without interference. This expansion brought the church into contact with various threats and challenges. Other organizations and institutions that felt threatened by the church's growing power sometimes attempted to interfere with its operations. Criminal elements sought to exploit or steal the valuable old blood for their own purposes. Foreign powers showed interest in Yharnam's remarkable medical breakthrough and the strategic advantages it might provide. Ludwig's hunters proved more than capable of dealing with these challenges. Their combination of enhanced physical capabilities, thanks to blood ministration, superior equipment, and tactical expertise, made them formidable opponents for anyone who opposed the church. More importantly, their reputation for effectiveness served as a deterrent that prevented many potential conflicts from escalating to actual violence. The development of specialized hunter equipment during this period reflected both the practical needs of their missions and the church's growing technical sophistication. Weapons were designed specifically for dealing with individuals who had been transformed by the old blood, incorporating both traditional craftsmanship and innovations based on the church's research. The famous trick weapons that would later become synonymous with Yharnam's hunters evolved during this time, combining versatility and effectiveness in unique ways. The Hunters' Workshop also served as a center for research into the more military applications of blood ministration. Different blood preparations were tested for their effects on combat performance, healing rates, and physical enhancement. This research, while primarily focused on improving hunter effectiveness, also contributed to the Church's broader understanding of the old blood and its potential applications. During Ludwig's tenure, the relationship between hunters and the general population of Yharnam remained largely positive. Citizens viewed the hunters as protectors and heroes, figures who sacrificed themselves for the common good. The Church encouraged this perception through propaganda and public ceremonies that emphasized the noble nature of the hunt and the dedication of those who pursued it. However, even during this golden age of the hunter's workshop, there were subtle signs of the problems that would later emerge. Some hunters reported experiencing vivid dreams or visions that seemed connected to their consumption of the old blood. Others described feeling disconnected from their humanity, as if the blood was gradually transforming them into something else. These concerns were generally dismissed as minor side effects of an otherwise beneficial treatment, but they represented early warnings of the transformation that would eventually overtake the hunting profession. The relationship between Ludwig and his hunters was characterized by mutual respect and shared purpose. Ludwig genuinely cared for the welfare of his subordinates and worked hard to ensure they were properly equipped and prepared for their missions. In return, the hunters showed him a devotion that went beyond mere professional loyalty. Many genuinely revered him as a leader and role model. This period of cooperation and success could not last indefinitely. The very effectiveness of the hunter's workshop in dealing with the negative effects of blood ministration encouraged the Church to push further in its experiments and applications. If hunters could handle the occasional adverse reaction, then perhaps the Church could be more aggressive in its use of the old blood, reaching out to new populations and trying new techniques. The seeds of future tragedy were being planted even during this time of apparent triumph. The more the Church relied on hunters to solve its problems, the more those hunters were exposed to dangerous influences. The more blood ministration was used to enhance human capabilities, the more likely it became that some recipients would undergo unwanted transformations. Most ominously, the success of the Church's early operations encouraged a hubris that would eventually lead to catastrophic overreach. Ludwig himself would eventually fall victim to the very forces he had been recruited to control. His transformation from heroic hunter to monstrous beast would serve as a terrible symbol of how completely the old blood could corrupt even the most noble intentions. But during these early years, such a fate seemed impossible. Ludwig was the very embodiment of righteous purpose, a warrior scholar who represented the best of what the Church hoped to achieve. The Hunter's Workshop under Ludwig's leadership represented the healing Church at its most effective and idealistic. It was an institution that genuinely served to protect people while advancing the Church's mission of human improvement through blood ministration. The hunters of this era were heroes in the truest sense, individuals who risked their lives to make their community safer and better. Yet even this noble institution carried within it the contradictions that would eventually destroy the Church itself. The very blood that gave hunters their strength and effectiveness was slowly transforming them into something inhuman. The weapons and techniques they developed to combat the old blood's negative effects would eventually be turned against the Church's own members. Most tragically, the success of the workshop encouraged the Church to pursue ever more dangerous experiments, ultimately leading to horrors that no amount of hunting skill could contain. The story of Ludwig and the Hunter's Workshop serves as a microcosm of the healing Church's broader trajectory, a tale of good intentions, remarkable achievements, and ultimate corruption by forces beyond human understanding or control. Chapter 4: The Schism. Old Blood and Ancient Wisdom. The relationship between Laurence's healing church and Master Willem's Byrgenwerth had always been complex, built on foundations of shared knowledge, yet strained by fundamental philosophical differences. As the Church grew in power and influence, these underlying tensions began to manifest in increasingly significant ways. What had started as a disagreement between teacher and student was evolving into a conflict between two competing visions of humanity's future. Willem, isolated in his studies at Byrgenwerth, watched the development of the healing church with growing concern. His former student's success in using the old blood for healing was undeniable, but the old scholar remained convinced that Laurence was walking a dangerous path. The reports that filtered back to Byrgenwerth spoke of remarkable medical breakthroughs, but they also hinted at changes in those who underwent blood ministration, changes that Willem recognized as potentially catastrophic. The fundamental difference between Willem's approach and Laurence's lay in their understanding of transcendence itself. Willem believed that humanity's evolution should come through gaining insight and wisdom, developing what he called eyes on the inside to perceive cosmic truths directly. This path was slow and uncertain, requiring years of study and contemplation, but Willem was convinced it was the safest route to genuine advancement. Laurence, by contrast, saw the old blood as a more direct and practical means of achieving human improvement. Blood ministration provided immediate, tangible benefits, healing disease, enhancing physical capabilities, and apparently opening pathways to higher forms of existence. Where Willem counseled patience and caution, Laurence advocated for bold action and practical application of their discoveries. These competing philosophies attracted different types of followers and researchers. Byrgenwerth remained a center for contemplative study, focused on understanding the nature of the Great Ones and the cosmic forces that governed existence. The scholars who remained with Willem were generally more cautious and theoretical in their approach, preferring careful observation to direct experimentation. The healing church, meanwhile, attracted individuals who were drawn to more immediate and practical applications of their research. These scholars and administrators were focused on solving human problems through the application of old blood-based treatments. They viewed Willem's approach as overly cautious and abstract, unable to provide the concrete benefits that blood ministration offered. The development of different research methodologies and priorities led to an increasing divergence between the two institutions. Byrgenwerth's studies focused on astronomical observation, the analysis of ancient texts, and attempts to make contact with the Great Ones through meditation and ritual. The Church's research emphasized medical applications, blood preparation techniques, and the development of new ministration methods. One area where these different approaches came into direct conflict was in the treatment of individuals who had undergone unwanted transformations as a result of contact with cosmic forces. Willem's scholars believed that such individuals should be studied and potentially help through the development of greater insight and understanding. The Church's approach, by contrast, was more pragmatic. Transformed individuals who posed a threat were to be contained or eliminated by hunters. The discovery of Rom, the vacuous spider, represented a crucial test case for these competing philosophies. This being, once human but transformed through contact with cosmic forces, embodied many of the questions that divided Willem and Laurence. Was Rom's transformation a successful evolution to a higher state of existence? Or was it a cautionary example of what happened when humans delved too deeply into cosmic mysteries? Willem viewed Rom as a success story, evidence that his careful approach to transcendence could yield positive results. The spider-like being appeared to possess enhanced perception and understanding, existing on a level that transcended ordinary human limitations. More importantly, Rom seemed to serve a protective function, maintaining illusions that shielded Yharnam from certain cosmic threats. The Church's perspective on Rom was more ambivalent. While they recognized the being's apparent power and knowledge, they were less convinced that its transformation represented a desirable outcome. The physical changes that Rom had undergone were dramatic and irreversible, and its mental state seemed alien and potentially unstable. From the Church's perspective, blood ministration offered the benefits of enhancement without the extreme physical transformation that Rom had experienced. The question of Rom also highlighted broader disagreements about the relationship between humanity and the Great Ones. Willem believed that contact with these cosmic entities was not only inevitable, but potentially beneficial, provided it was approached with proper preparation and understanding. His goal was to facilitate communication and cooperation between humanity and the Great Ones, viewing them as potential teachers and guides. Laurence was more skeptical of direct contact with the Great Ones, preferring to study and utilize the old blood, without necessarily engaging with its ultimate source. The Church's approach was more focused on practical benefits than on philosophical understanding of cosmic relationships. This difference in perspective would prove crucial as events unfolded, particularly regarding the Church's later encounters with entities like Ebrietas. The growing tensions between Byrgenwerth and the Healing Church were exacerbated by practical concerns about resources and territory. Both institutions required access to the underground labyrinths where the old blood and other cosmic artifacts could be found. Competition for these resources led to conflicts over exploration rights and research priorities. The Church's greater resources and more aggressive expansion policies gave it significant advantages in this competition. Where Byrgenwerth had traditionally sent small teams of scholars to carefully explore specific sites, the Church deployed larger expeditions, protected by hunters and equipped with advanced tools and weapons. This more aggressive approach allowed the Church to claim access to sites that Byrgenwerth scholars had been studying for years. These territorial disputes were complicated by the discovery that some of the underground sites contained dangers that required immediate action rather than careful study. Hostile creatures, environmental hazards, and unstable cosmic phenomena posed threats that could not be addressed through passive observation. The Church's hunters proved better equipped to deal with these dangers, giving the Church a practical advantage in accessing the most dangerous and potentially valuable sites. The relationship between the two institutions was further strained by incidents involving shared personnel. Some scholars moved between Byrgenwerth and the Church, carrying knowledge and techniques from one institution to the other. While this exchange could have been beneficial, it often led to accusations of theft and betrayal from both sides. One particularly significant area of disagreement concerned the proper approach to studying the artifacts and specimens recovered from the underground sites. Willem insisted on careful, non-invasive study techniques that preserved specimens in their original state as much as possible. The Church favoured more aggressive research methods that prioritise practical understanding over preservation. These methodological differences led to conflicts over specific specimens and artifacts. Both institutions claimed the right to study certain discoveries, leading to disputes that sometimes escalated beyond mere academic disagreement. The Church's greater political influence and resources generally gave it the upper hand in these conflicts, further deepening the resentment between the two groups. The philosophical differences between Willem and Laurence also manifested in their approaches to sharing knowledge with the broader community. Willem believed that cosmic truths should be revealed carefully and gradually, shared only with those who had demonstrated the wisdom and preparation necessary to handle such knowledge safely. His approach was elitist and conservative, prioritizing safety over accessibility. Laurence took a more populist approach, believing that the benefits of their discoveries should be made available to as many people as possible. The Church's blood ministration programs represented this philosophy in action. Rather than restricting access to a small group of prepared scholars, the Church sought to provide healing and enhancement to anyone who needed it. This difference in approach had profound implications for the relationship between the two institutions and the broader community. The Church's willingness to provide immediate, tangible benefits made it far more popular with the general population than Byrgenwerth's more abstract and exclusive approach. This popularity translated into political influence and resources that further widened the gap between the two institutions. The breaking point in the relationship between Willem and Laurence came not through any single dramatic confrontation, but through the gradual accumulation of philosophical differences, practical conflicts, and personal disappointments. Willem's growing isolation at Byrgenwerth reflected not just his dedication to contemplative study, but also his increasing despair over what he saw as his former students' betrayal of everything they had once shared. For Laurence, the conflict with his former master was equally painful. He genuinely respected Willem and valued their past relationship, but he was convinced that his approach to the Old Blood was not only correct, but morally necessary. The suffering that blood ministration could alleviate, the lives it could save, and the human potential it could unlock seemed to justify any risks or theoretical concerns that Willem might raise. The final separation between the two men occurred gradually rather than through any single decisive moment. As the church's influence grew and Byrgenwerth's declined, communication between the institutions became increasingly infrequent and formal. Personal relationships that had once bridged the philosophical divide began to deteriorate under the weight of competing loyalties and conflicting priorities. The tragedy of this schism lay not just in the personal cost to Willem and Laurence, but in what it represented for the future of their research. Had the two institutions been able to maintain their cooperation, combining Willem's caution and wisdom with Laurence's practical innovation, they might have been able to avoid the catastrophes that would eventually befall both organizations. Instead, their separation ensured that each would pursue its path in isolation, without the balancing influence that their partnership had once provided. The intellectual isolation that resulted from this schism would prove costly for both institutions. Byrgenwerth scholars, lacking access to the church's practical experience with blood ministration, failed to fully understand the dangers they were studying. The church's researchers, cut off from Byrgenwerth's deeper theoretical understanding, pursued increasingly aggressive experiments without adequate appreciation for the cosmic forces they were manipulating. Willem's final words to Laurence, "Fear the old blood," would echo through the years that followed, a warning that proved increasingly prophetic as events unfolded. But by the time the full wisdom of these words became apparent, it would be far too late for either institution to change course. The paths they had chosen would lead inexorably toward the horrors that would eventually consume Yharnam and transform both teacher and student into tragic monuments to the dangers of unchecked ambition. The schism between Byrgenwerth and the healing church represents one of those crucial moments in history where different choices might have led to entirely different outcomes. The knowledge and wisdom that existed within both institutions, if properly combined and applied, might have allowed humanity to safely navigate the cosmic mysteries they had uncovered. Instead, their separation ensured that each would face the challenges ahead alone, with consequences that would prove catastrophic for both. Chapter 5: The Blood and the Beast Scourge. As years passed and blood ministration became increasingly common throughout Yharnam, the subtle warnings that Willem had perceived in his early studies of the Old Blood began to manifest in increasingly obvious and disturbing ways. What had started as rare, isolated incidents of adverse reactions gradually evolved into a pattern of transformation that would ultimately threaten the very foundation of the civilization that Laurence had worked so hard to build. The first signs of what would later be called the Scourge of Beasts were easy to dismiss as isolated medical anomalies. Patients who had undergone extensive blood ministration sometimes reported strange dreams, unusual cravings, or temporary changes in behavior. These symptoms were generally mild and seemed to resolve themselves over time, leading church doctors to classify them as minor side effects of an otherwise beneficial treatment. However, more careful observation revealed that these seemingly harmless symptoms were often precursors to more dramatic changes. Patients who had initially shown only mild behavioral alterations sometimes progressed to more severe transformations. Physical changes began to accompany the mental ones: increased hair growth, dental modifications, alterations in posture and gait that suggested fundamental changes in skeletal and muscular structure. The church's initial response to these developments was to intensify their research into blood preparation and administration techniques. Scholars theorized that the unwanted transformations were the result of improper dosages, contaminated blood samples, or individual genetic predispositions that could be identified and avoided. They developed more sophisticated screening procedures for potential patients and refined their blood preparation methods to eliminate what they believed were the causes of adverse reactions. For a time, these measures seemed effective. The rate of obvious transformations decreased, and the Church was able to point to improved safety records as evidence that they had solved the problem. However, what they had actually accomplished was simply to slow down and disguise the transformation process, rather than eliminate it entirely. The Old Blood's influence was now working more subtly, creating changes that were less immediately obvious, but potentially more dangerous in the long term. The true nature of the Beast Scourge began to become apparent as the transformed individual's conditions progressed beyond the initial stages. What had seemed like manageable behavioral changes gradually escalated into genuine loss of human consciousness and identity. Patients who had appeared to be recovering would suddenly undergo rapid physical and mental transformations that left them as something fundamentally different from human beings. These transformed individuals, the first true beasts, retained little of their former personalities or memories. They were driven by primal instincts and urges that made them dangerous to themselves and others. Most significantly, they seemed to be driven by an insatiable hunger for blood, particularly blood from humans who had undergone ministration themselves. This cannibalistic behavior created a feedback loop that accelerated the spread of the transformation. The Church's response to these developments revealed both their adaptability and their fundamental misunderstanding of what they were dealing with. Rather than questioning the basic premises of blood ministration, Church leaders focused on containment and management strategies. They developed protocols for identifying individuals who were beginning to transform, procedures for isolating them from the general population, and techniques for either reversing the transformation or eliminating the threat they posed. The Hunter's Workshop, under Ludwig's leadership, found itself at the center of these containment efforts. What had originally been conceived as a research and security organization was rapidly transformed into something more akin to a specialized military force dedicated to combating the beast threat. Hunters developed new weapons and tactics specifically designed for dealing with transformed humans, and their role in Church operations became increasingly central. The weapons developed during this period reflected the unique challenges posed by the Beast Scourge. Traditional weapons proved inadequate against creatures that possessed enhanced strength, speed, and resilience as a result of their transformation. The famous trick weapons of Yharnam's hunters evolved in response to these challenges, incorporating mechanisms that allowed for rapid adaptation to different combat situations and specialized features designed to exploit the weaknesses of beast physiology. The development of serrated weapons represented a particularly important innovation in anti-beast warfare. Church researchers discovered that certain types of cutting implements were particularly effective against transformed individuals, apparently causing more damage than would be expected from their physical characteristics alone. This discovery led to the incorporation of serrated edges into many hunter weapons, and contributed to the development of specialized anti-beast ammunition and tools. The relationship between blood ministration and beast transformation created a terrible paradox for the Church. The very treatment that had made their organization successful and powerful was also the source of their greatest threat. Discontinuing blood ministration entirely would eliminate the Beast Scourge, but it would also destroy the Church's primary claim to relevance and authority. The solution they pursued was to continue blood ministration while attempting to manage its negative consequences through hunter intervention. This approach required an increasingly complex and sophisticated infrastructure. The Church developed systems for monitoring blood ministration recipients for signs of transformation, networks of informants who could report unusual behavior in the community, and rapid response teams that could intervene when transformations occurred. The bureaucracy required to support these activities grew exponentially, transforming the Church from a relatively simple religious organization into a complex administrative and military apparatus. The psychological impact of the beast scourge on Yharnam's population was profound and lasting. The knowledge that anyone who had undergone blood ministration might potentially transform into a monster created an atmosphere of suspicion and fear that permeated every aspect of daily life. Families were torn apart by accusations and suspicions. Communities divided by the need to constantly monitor each other for signs of transformation. The Church attempted to manage this psychological crisis through a combination of propaganda and religious doctrine. They developed theological explanations for the beast scourge that positioned it as a test of faith or a consequence of insufficient devotion to church teachings. These explanations served to deflect blame from blood ministration itself, while providing a framework for understanding and coping with the ongoing crisis. The concept of the hunt emerged during this period as both a practical necessity and a spiritual ritual. The Church promoted the idea that hunting beasts was not merely a matter of public safety, but a sacred duty that brought participants closer to divine truth. This religious framework helped to recruit and motivate hunters, while also providing a way for ordinary citizens to participate in combating the scourge through support and cooperation. The nighttime hunts that would later become synonymous with Yharnam began as emergency responses to beast sightings, but they gradually evolved into regular, organized events. The Church established protocols for declaring a hunt, mobilizing hunters and civilian volunteers, and coordinating search and elimination efforts. These hunts served multiple purposes. They provided an outlet for community fear and anger, demonstrated the Church's continued ability to protect the population, and created opportunities for the Church to identify and eliminate potential threats before they fully manifested. However, the psychological toll of participating in these hunts was significant. Hunters were required to kill creatures that had once been human, often individuals they had known personally. The trauma of this experience, combined with the effects of the blood ministration that hunters received to enhance their capabilities, created additional risks for mental instability and eventual transformation. The Church's attempts to manage the beast scourge also led to increasingly aggressive research into the underlying causes and potential solutions. Scientists and scholars within the Church hierarchy pursued various theories about the nature of the old blood and its effects on human physiology. Some focused on genetic factors that might predispose individuals to transformation, while others investigated environmental conditions that might trigger or accelerate the process. One particularly significant area of research involved attempts to identify individuals who seemed naturally resistant to transformation. These individuals, who could undergo extensive blood ministration without showing obvious signs of beast-like changes, were studied intensively in hopes of understanding what protected them and whether their resistance could be transferred to others. The Church also began to explore more radical approaches to managing the scourge, including attempts to control or direct the transformation process rather than simply preventing it. Some researchers theorized that if the beast transformation could be understood and guided, it might be possible to create controlled versions that retained human intelligence while gaining enhanced physical capabilities. These experiments represented a significant escalation in the Church's research activities and marked a departure from Laurence's original vision of using the old blood purely for healing. The pressure to find solutions to the beast scourge was driving the Church toward increasingly desperate and dangerous research projects that would have profound implications for the future. The beast scourge also had significant economic and social effects on Yharnam. The uncertainty about who might transform and when created disruptions in commerce, industry, and social relationships. The resources required to support the hunter's workshop and the various containment efforts placed increasing strain on the Church's finances and diverted attention from other activities. International relationships were also affected as word of Yharnam's problems spread to other regions. Foreign governments and institutions became increasingly wary of contact with Yharnam, fearing that the beast scourge might spread beyond the city's borders. This isolation further increased the pressure on the Church to find solutions to their crisis, while also limiting their access to external resources and expertise. The personal toll on Laurence during this period must have been enormous. The man who had left Byrgenwerth with such confidence in his ability to harness the old blood for human benefit was now forced to confront the reality that his greatest achievement had also created his greatest threat. The Beast Scourge represented a direct challenge to everything he had worked to build, and its persistence despite the Church's best efforts must have been deeply demoralizing. The irony of Laurence's situation was particularly bitter, given his original disagreement with Willem. His former master's warnings about the dangers of the old blood were proving prophetic in the most devastating way possible. Yet by this point, the Church had become so dependent on blood ministration and so committed to its continued use that abandoning it seemed impossible, even if Laurence had been willing to admit that Willem had been correct. The Beast Scourge represented the beginning of the end for Laurence's vision of human improvement through blood ministration. While the Church would continue to operate and even expand its activities for some time to come, the fundamental premise that had driven its creation, that the old blood could be safely used to benefit humanity, had been definitively disproven. The challenge now was to manage the consequences of this realization while attempting to maintain the Church's authority and relevance in a world that was rapidly becoming more dangerous and chaotic. Chapter 6. The Fishing Hamlet and the Weight of Sin. Deep in the hunter's nightmare, where blood-drunk hunters are condemned to wander for eternity, lies a secret that cuts to the very heart of Laurence's legacy and the Healing Church's darkest chapter. The fishing hamlet represents not just a location, but a testament to how far the Church had fallen from its original ideals of healing and human betterment. In this remote coastal village, the Church's quest for knowledge and power led to atrocities that would ultimately damn not just the perpetrators, but generations of hunters to come. The hamlet itself was once a simple fishing community, remote and isolated from the political machinations of Yharnam. Its inhabitants lived simple lives, sustained by the sea, and largely unaware of the cosmic forces that would eventually engulf their world. The village's fate was sealed when the corpse of a great one known as Kos washed ashore on their beach, an event that would transform both the villagers and the course of history itself. Kos, even in death, carried within her body parasites and influences that began to affect the hamlet's residents in profound ways. These changes were not the violent transformations that characterized the Beast Scourge in Yharnam, but rather a more gradual evolution that seemed to bring the villagers closer to their oceanic environment. They developed fish-like characteristics, gained new forms of perception, and began to worship the deceased Great One as a benevolent deity. The discovery of Kos's corpse and the transformed villagers presented an unprecedented opportunity for the scholars of Byrgenwerth and the Healing Church. Here was a chance to study the effects of direct contact with a Great One, to understand the mechanisms of transformation at their source, and potentially to harness these forces for the benefit of humanity. The potential for advancing their understanding of cosmic truth and human evolution seemed limitless. However, the approach taken by the Church and its associated scholars revealed how completely they had abandoned the ethical constraints that had once guided their research. Rather than attempting to communicate with the transformed villagers or study them in their natural environment, the researchers chose to treat them as specimens to be collected and analyzed. The hamlet's residents, despite their obvious intelligence and capacity for suffering, were viewed as valuable research materials rather than sentient beings deserving of respect and consideration. The expedition to the fishing hamlet included some of the most prominent figures in the Church's hierarchy. Lady Maria, one of Gehrman's most accomplished students and a hunter of exceptional skill and dedication, was among those who participated in what would become known as the hamlet's destruction. Her presence in the expedition speaks to how the Church's most noble and idealistic members were drawn into participating in actions that contradicted their fundamental values. Gehrman himself, the first hunter and architect of the Hunter's Workshop, played a crucial role in the hamlet's fate. His participation in the expedition demonstrates how completely the Church's mission had shifted from protection and healing to exploitation and violence. The man who had once been Laurence's ally in the noble work of establishing the Hunter's Workshop was now leading raids against innocent communities in pursuit of research materials. The methods employed by the Church's expedition to the hamlet were brutal and systematic. Villagers were killed not in battle or self-defense, but as part of deliberate efforts to harvest their transformed bodies for study. Skulls were cracked open to examine the development of eyes on the inside. The enhanced perception that Willem had theorized was necessary for human evolution. Bodies were dissected and analyzed to understand the mechanisms of transformation that Kos's influence had triggered. Most horrifically, the expedition interfered with Kos herself, preventing the birth of her child and violating the corpse of the Great One in ways that would have cosmic consequences. The orphan of Kos, trapped in a state between life and death by the Church's interference, became a focal point for the rage and sorrow of both the Great One and the slaughtered villagers. The immediate justification for these actions was research. The Church's scholars convinced themselves that the knowledge gained from studying the hamlet's residents would ultimately benefit all of humanity. They argued that the suffering inflicted on a small community was acceptable if it led to discoveries that could alleviate suffering on a much larger scale. This utilitarian calculus allowed them to rationalize actions that they would never have contemplated in their earlier, more idealistic days. But the deeper motivation was the Church's growing desperation in the face of the beast scourge and other challenges to their authority. The organization that Laurence had founded as a force for healing and human improvement was struggling to maintain its relevance and power in the face of mounting evidence that their central premise had been flawed from the beginning. The hamlet represented an opportunity to find new sources of knowledge and power that might allow them to overcome their current difficulties. The psychological impact of participating in the hamlet's destruction was devastating for many of the Church's members. Lady Maria, despite her exceptional skills and dedication to the hunter's calling, was so traumatized by her participation that she threw away her beloved weapon and swore off hunting entirely. Her subsequent work caring for the patients in the research hall represented an attempt to atone for her actions, but the guilt and horror of what she had done ultimately drove her to take her own life. The transformation of the Church's most noble members into participants in genocide represents one of the most tragic aspects of Laurence's legacy. These were individuals who had genuinely believed in the Church's mission and had dedicated their lives to protecting and serving others. Yet the institutional pressures and ideological commitments that the Church had developed over time led them to participate in actions that violated their most fundamental values. The cosmic consequences of the hamlet's destruction extended far beyond the immediate victims. Kos, despite her death, retained consciousness on a level that transcended physical existence. The Great One's grief and rage at the violation of her child and the slaughter of her worshippers created a curse that would affect all hunters, not just those who had directly participated in the atrocity. This curse manifested as the Hunter's Nightmare, a realm where blood-drunk hunters are condemned to hunt eternally without rest or release. The nightmare serves as both punishment and prison, trapping those who had given in to the intoxicating effects of blood ministration and the violence that it promoted. The existence of this realm represents a cosmic form of justice that operates beyond human understanding or control. The creation of the Hunter's Nightmare also demonstrates the interconnected nature of the cosmic forces that the Church had been attempting to manipulate. Actions taken in the physical world had consequences that extended into realms of existence that the Church's scholars barely understood. Their attempts to exploit cosmic forces for their own purposes had triggered responses that they were completely unprepared to handle. For Laurence personally, the hamlet's destruction represented the complete corruption of his original vision. The man who had left Byrgenwerth with dreams of using the old blood to heal and improve humanity had become complicit in genocide committed in the name of research and power. The noble ideals that had motivated his split from Willem had been perverted into justifications for unspeakable cruelty. The Church's attempts to cover up and forget the hamlet's destruction reveal their awareness that their actions could not be justified by their stated values. Rather than acknowledging what they had done and attempting to make amends, Church leaders chose to suppress knowledge of the expedition and eliminate anyone who might reveal the truth about their actions. This cover-up represents a final abandonment of the transparency and accountability that any ethical institution requires. The presence of figures like Brador, the Church assassin in The Hunter's Nightmare, demonstrates the lengths to which the Church was willing to go to protect its secrets. Even in death and damnation, the Church's agents continued to work to prevent the truth about the hamlet from being revealed. This obsessive secrecy suggests a deep awareness of guilt and an understanding that their actions had been fundamentally wrong. The fish-like villagers who survived the initial slaughter were condemned to an existence in the nightmare realm, forever mourning their dead and cursing those who had destroyed their community. Their continued presence serves as a constant reminder of the Church's crimes and ensures that the memory of what happened cannot be completely erased. The priest who wanders the hamlet, cursing Byrgenwerth and calling for vengeance, gives voice to the pain and anger of all the victims. The hamlet's destruction also represents a broader pattern of exploitation and violence that had come to characterize the Church's operations. What began as isolated incidents of research overreach had evolved into systematic campaigns of violence against anyone who possessed knowledge or characteristics that the Church wanted to study. The hamlet was simply the most extreme example of a mentality that viewed other beings as expendable resources rather than entities deserving of moral consideration. The knowledge gained from the hamlet's destruction proved to be of a limited value in solving the Church's fundamental problems. Despite all the suffering inflicted and the cosmic consequences triggered, the research conducted on the villagers' transformed bodies did not provide the breakthroughs that the Church had hoped for. The beast scourge continued to plague Yharnam. The old blood remained dangerous and unpredictable, and the Church's authority continued to decline. This failure of the Church's research to produce meaningful benefits makes the hamlet's destruction even more tragic. Lives were destroyed, and cosmic forces unleashed not in pursuit of genuinely beneficial knowledge, but in service of an institution's desperate attempt to maintain its relevance and power. The utilitarian justifications that the Church had used to rationalize their actions were revealed to be hollow when the promised benefits failed to materialize. The hamlet story also illustrates the dangers of institutional momentum and ideological commitment. Once the Church had committed itself to certain approaches and assumptions, it became increasingly difficult for its members to question or abandon these commitments, even when they led to obviously harmful outcomes. The institution's need to justify its past actions created pressure to continue down the same path, regardless of the moral cost. For the hunters who participated in the hamlet's destruction, the experience represented a fundamental betrayal of everything they had been taught to believe about their calling. They had been told that hunting was a noble profession, dedicated to protecting innocent people from the dangers posed by the beast scourge. Yet in the hamlet, they found themselves killing innocent people in service of their institution's research agenda. This betrayal of their fundamental values helps explain why so many of the hunters who participated in the expedition eventually succumbed to blood drunkenness and were condemned to the hunter's nightmare. The psychological trauma of participating in genocide, combined with the increasing doses of old blood required to maintain their enhanced capabilities, created a perfect storm of factors that led to their corruption and downfall. The hamlet's destruction stands as perhaps the darkest chapter in the Healing Church's history, but it was not an aberration or deviation from the Church's normal operations. Instead, it represented the logical endpoint of the institution's gradual transformation from a healing organization into an exploitative research apparatus. The same mentality that allowed church scholars to justify experimentation on unwilling subjects in their laboratories made it possible for them to justify genocide when the potential research benefits were large enough. Understanding the hamlet's fate is crucial to understanding Laurence's ultimate transformation and damnation. While he may not have personally participated in the expedition, his role as the church's founder and leader made him morally responsible for the actions taken in the institution's name. The curse that Kos placed on the hunters extended to all those who had enabled and benefited from the church's crimes, including its founder. The fishing hamlet thus serves as both a literal location in the hunter's nightmare and a metaphorical representation of how completely Laurence's noble vision had been corrupted. What began as a dream of using cosmic forces to heal and improve humanity had become a nightmare of exploitation, violence, and cosmic horror that would ultimately consume not just its victims, but its perpetrators as well. Chapter 7. The First Cleric Beast, Laurence's Transformation. The transformation of Laurence from revered First Vicar into the first of the terrible cleric beasts represents the ultimate irony of his story. The man who had dedicated his life to healing and human improvement became the very embodiment of the corruption he had unleashed upon the world. This metamorphosis was not sudden or unexpected, but rather the inevitable culmination of years of exposure to the old blood and the psychological weight of the horrors committed in his name. By the time Laurence underwent his final transformation, the healing church had already begun to fracture under the weight of its own contradictions. The beast scourge continued to spread despite all efforts to contain it. The hunter's workshop, once the church's proud martial arm, was increasingly staffed by individuals who struggled with their own blood-driven madness. The atrocities committed at the fishing hamlet had created cosmic enemies that threatened the very existence of the church's operations. Laurence himself had been consuming the old blood for years, both as part of his research into its properties and as a means of maintaining the enhanced vitality necessary for his demanding role as church leader. Like many of the church's elite, he had convinced himself that his superior knowledge and spiritual preparation would protect him from the negative effects that afflicted ordinary recipients of blood ministration. This hubris would prove to be his ultimate downfall. The first signs of Laurence's transformation were subtle and easily dismissed. Enhanced physical strength and vitality were expected effects of blood ministration, and the First Vicar's increased capabilities were viewed as benefits rather than warning signs. Slight changes in temperament, increased aggression, reduced empathy, growing disconnection from human concerns, were rationalized as necessary adaptations to the church's increasingly dangerous environment. More concerning were the psychological changes that Laurence experienced as his transformation progressed. His once idealistic vision of human improvement through blood ministration began to evolve into something darker and more primal. Where he had once seen the old blood as a tool for healing, he increasingly viewed it as an end in itself, a source of power and transformation that justified any sacrifice or corruption necessary to obtain it. The irony of Laurence's situation was that his deep knowledge of the old blood and its effects made him acutely aware of what was happening to him, even as he proved powerless to prevent it. Unlike ordinary victims of the beast scourge, who often underwent their transformations in ignorance of what was occurring, Laurence watched his own corruption with the clinical detachment of a scholar observing an experimental subject. This awareness only added to the psychological torment of his condition. Laurence was forced to witness the gradual erosion of his humanity, while retaining enough of his original personality to understand the full implications of what he was becoming. The man who had once promised Willem that he would remember the adage to fear the old blood was now living proof of what happened when that fear was overcome by ambition and necessity. The physical aspects of Laurence's transformation followed the pattern that had been observed in other cleric beasts, but with unique characteristics that reflected his particular relationship to the old blood and the cosmic forces it channeled. His body grew larger and more powerful, developing the bestial characteristics that marked all victims of advanced beast scourge. However, his transformation was accompanied by an internal fire that distinguished him from other transformed individuals. This flame that burned within Laurence was not merely a physical phenomenon, but a manifestation of the spiritual and cosmic forces that had shaped his life and work. The fire represented both his original passion for healing and improvement and the corruption of that passion into something destructive and consuming. It was a fitting symbol for a man whose greatest virtues had become the source of his ultimate damnation. The process of Laurence's transformation was accelerated by the psychological trauma of witnessing the collapse of everything he had worked to build. The healing church, despite its continued political power, had failed in its fundamental mission of improving human existence through blood ministration. Instead of creating a better world, Laurence's innovations had unleashed horrors that threatened to consume all of civilization. The knowledge that his life's work had been fundamentally flawed must have been devastating for a man of Laurence's intelligence and dedication. The realization that Willem had been correct about the dangers of the old blood, and that his own stubborn refusal to heed those warnings had led to countless deaths and transformations, created a level of guilt and despair that accelerated his physical and mental deterioration. As Laurence's transformation progressed, he began to lose his ability to communicate with other humans, though he retained enough awareness to understand what was happening around him. This partial consciousness made his condition particularly tragic. He was trapped within a bestial form, unable to express his thoughts or feelings, yet still capable of experiencing the full horror of his situation. The church's response to their founder's transformation revealed the institution's complete abandonment of its original values. Rather than attempting to help Laurence, or at least allow him to die with dignity, church leaders made the calculated decision to eliminate him as a threat to their operations. The man who had created their organization and led it to unprecedented power was killed by the very hunters he had helped to establish. The method of Laurence's death was particularly significant given his lifelong work with healing and the old blood. The church's hunters used fire to kill him, recognizing that the beast scourge was vulnerable to flame in ways that ordinary humans were not. This use of fire to destroy a beast represented the ultimate irony of Laurence's story. The healing properties of the old blood that he had championed were ultimately overcome by one of humanity's oldest and most primitive tools. However, death did not bring Laurence the release that it might have provided to an ordinary individual. His deep connection to the old blood and the cosmic forces it channeled ensured that his consciousness persisted beyond physical death. Moreover, his role in the atrocities committed by the healing church, particularly the destruction of the fishing hamlet, made him subject to the same cosmic curse that affected all the church's blood-drunk agents. The curse placed by Kos ensured that Laurence would not find peace in death, but would instead be condemned to exist in the hunter's nightmare for eternity. In this realm of punishment and torment, he was doomed to burn forever. The internal fire that had characterized his transformation, now serving as a source of endless suffering rather than power or illumination. The version of Laurence that exists in the hunter's nightmare is a tragic figure who embodies all the contradictions and failures of the healing church's mission. He retains enough of his original consciousness to suffer from the knowledge of what he has become and what his actions have wrought, yet he is trapped in a bestial form that prevents him from communicating or acting on that knowledge. The flames that surround Laurence in the nightmare serve multiple symbolic functions. They represent the passion and idealism that had originally motivated his work, now corrupted into a source of endless torment. They symbolize the destructive consequences of his actions, which continue to burn long after his physical death. Most importantly, they serve as a reminder of the cosmic justice that operates beyond human understanding or control. The altar where Laurence's skull is displayed in the Grand Cathedral represents the ultimate perversion of his legacy. The church that he founded chose to venerate his physical remains, while completely ignoring the lessons that his transformation should have taught them. instead of learning from his fate and abandoning the dangerous practices that had led to his corruption. Subsequent church leaders continued down the same path that had destroyed their founder. The reverence shown for Laurence's skull by figures like Vicar Amelia demonstrates how completely the church had lost sight of its original mission. Instead of serving as a warning about the dangers of the old blood, Laurence's remains were treated as sacred relics that somehow blessed and legitimized the continued use of blood ministration. This perversion of his memory ensured that his mistakes would be repeated rather than learned from. The fact that Laurence's true skull exists only within the hunter's nightmare, while a false relic is venerated in the physical world, serves as a metaphor for the gap between reality and the church's propaganda. The institution that claimed to follow his teachings had created a false version of his legacy that served their political needs while ignoring the tragic truth of his actual fate. For those who encounter Laurence in the hunter's nightmare, his presence serves as both a warning and a test. The First Vicar's transformation demonstrates the ultimate consequences of pursuing power and knowledge without adequate consideration for moral and cosmic boundaries. His eternal suffering illustrates the price that must be paid for actions that violate the fundamental order of existence. Yet Laurence's story is not simply one of condemnation and punishment. His original motivations, the desire to heal suffering, improve human existence, and transcend the limitations of mortality, were genuinely noble. The tragedy of his fate lies not in evil intentions, but in the corruption of good intentions by forces beyond human understanding or control. The transformation of Laurence from idealistic scholar to monstrous beast to eternally burning phantom represents a complete cycle of human ambition and cosmic justice. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of pursuing knowledge and power without adequate humility or respect for the forces being manipulated. It demonstrates how even the most noble intentions can be corrupted when they encounter cosmic truths that transcend human comprehension. Understanding Laurence's transformation is crucial to understanding the broader themes of Bloodborne's narrative. His fate illustrates the cosmic horror that emerges when humans attempt to transcend their natural limitations through contact with alien forces. The old blood that promised healing and improvement ultimately delivered corruption and transformation, not because it was inherently evil, but because it represented power that humans were not equipped to safely handle. The First Vicar's story thus serves as both the foundation and the culmination of Bloodborne's exploration of human ambition and cosmic horror. Laurence's transformation from healer to beast to burning phantom traces the complete arc of how good intentions can lead to damnation when they encounter forces that operate according to logic beyond human understanding. Chapter 8: The Hunter's Nightmare, Eternal Punishment and Cosmic Justice. The Hunter's Nightmare stands as perhaps the most profound manifestation of cosmic justice in the world of Bloodborne, a realm where the consequences of the healing church's crimes are made manifest in the form of eternal punishment for those who participated in or enabled their atrocities. This nightmarish dimension serves not merely as a prison, but as a carefully constructed form of poetic justice that reflects the specific nature of each prisoner's crimes and ensures that their suffering continues indefinitely. The creation of the Hunter's Nightmare was not the result of human action or design, but rather emerged from the grief and rage of Kos, the Great One whose corpse had washed ashore at the fishing hamlet. The violation of her body and the slaughter of her worshippers had created a wound in the cosmic order that demanded redress. The nightmare realm that emerged from this cosmic trauma was both punishment and prison, designed to contain and torment those responsible for the hamlet's destruction. The nature of the nightmare itself reflects the twisted logic of cosmic justice. Rather than simply subjecting its prisoners to arbitrary suffering, the realm forces them to experience eternal versions of the very activities that had led to their damnation. Blood-drunk hunters are condemned to hunt forever, never finding the satisfaction or resolution that they had sought in life. The violence that had once provided them with purpose and meaning becomes a source of endless frustration and despair. For Laurence, the nightmare's punishment is particularly fitting, given his role as the architect of the healing church's corruption. The man who had once preached about the divine nature of the old blood and its capacity to heal and improve humanity is now trapped in a form that represents the ultimate perversion of those ideals. His eternal burning serves as a constant reminder of the destructive consequences of his ambitions and the cosmic forces he had attempted to control. The environment of the hunter's nightmare itself serves as a twisted mirror of the world that Laurence and his contemporaries had created. The cathedral where his burning form rests is a grotesque parody of the grand cathedral he had built in Yharnam, complete with the same architectural elements but perverted into something nightmarish and oppressive. The altar where he lies burning is positioned in the same location where his skull would later be venerated, creating a connection between his eternal suffering and the false worship that his legacy would inspire. The presence of other significant figures from the church's history within the nightmare demonstrates the comprehensive nature of cosmic justice. Lady Maria, despite her eventual rejection of hunting and her attempts to atone for her participation in the hamlet's destruction, remains trapped in the nightmare as guardian of its deepest secrets. Her role as protector of the research hall and the path to the fishing hamlet reflects her continued complicity in the church's crimes. Even after her death, Ludwig, the once noble first church hunter, has been transformed into a grotesque beast that embodies the corruption of his idealistic vision of hunting as a sacred calling. His presence in the nightmare serves as a reminder that even the most sincere and dedicated servants of the church were ultimately corrupted by the institution's fundamental flaws. The hunter, who had once inspired others with his noble vision of their calling, has become a mindless monster driven by bloodlust and violence. The landscape of the hunter's nightmare itself tells the story of the church's crimes and their consequences. The twisted version of Cathedral Ward that forms the nightmare's first area is populated by blood-drunk hunters who endlessly patrol and fight, never finding the resolution or purpose they seek. These figures represent the ultimate fate of all those who had embraced the church's vision of hunting as a solution to the problems created by blood ministration. The research hall, with its grotesque experiments and suffering patients, serves as a monument to the church's abandonment of medical ethics in pursuit of knowledge and power. The patients who wander the hall's corridors in various states of transformation and madness represent the countless victims of the church's research programs. Their presence in the nightmare ensures that the memory of their suffering is preserved, and that those responsible cannot escape the consequences of their actions. The fishing hamlet itself, preserved within the nightmare in the state it existed at the time of its destruction, serves as the ultimate testimony to the church's crimes. The village remains frozen at the moment of its violation, with the bodies of its slaughtered inhabitants still visible, and the signs of the violence committed against them permanently preserved. This preservation ensures that the truth of what happened cannot be forgotten or denied, even by those who would prefer to bury the evidence of their guilt. The relationship between the nightmare and the physical world reflects the cosmic nature of the justice being dispensed. Actions taken in the material realm have consequences that extend into dimensions beyond normal human perception or understanding. The church's attempts to hide or minimize their crimes in the physical world are rendered meaningless by the nightmare's preservation of the truth and its eternal punishment of the guilty. For Laurence specifically, the nightmare represents the complete failure of his life's work and the ultimate vindication of Willem's warnings. The man who had left Byrgenwerth convinced that he could safely harness the power of the old blood is now trapped in a realm created by the very cosmic forces he had thought he could control. His eternal burning serves as a testament to the hubris that had driven his rejection of his master's caution and wisdom. The fact that Laurence retains some level of consciousness within his burning form makes his punishment particularly cruel and meaningful. Unlike a simple death, which might have provided release from guilt and suffering, his condition in the nightmare forces him to remain aware of what he has become and what his actions have wrought. He is compelled to experience eternal suffering while retaining enough of his original personality to fully understand the justice of his fate. The flames that consume Laurence in the nightmare are not merely physical, but represent the spiritual and emotional torment that results from complete moral failure. The fire that burns within him is fueled by his knowledge of the suffering he has caused, the lives he has destroyed, and the noble ideals he has corrupted. Each moment of his existence serves as a reminder of the gap between his original intentions and his ultimate achievements. The nightmare's treatment of Laurence also serves to illustrate the cosmic perspective on human ambition and achievement. From a cosmic viewpoint, the distinctions between noble intentions and evil actions become irrelevant when the consequences are equally destructive. Laurence's genuine desire to help humanity is meaningless in the face of the actual harm his actions caused, and the nightmare's justice operates according to results rather than intentions. The presence of the Orphan of Kos at the heart of the nightmare represents the focal point of the cosmic rage that created this realm of punishment. The child that was prevented from being born naturally has become a manifestation of pure cosmic fury, embodying the violation that was committed against both Kos and the natural order itself. The orphan's existence ensures that the nightmare will continue to function as long as the injustice it represents remains unaddressed. The relationship between the orphan and the other inhabitants of the nightmare reflects the hierarchy of guilt and responsibility that governs the realm's operations. Laurence, as the founder and leader of the institution responsible for the hamlet's destruction, bears ultimate responsibility and therefore suffers the most severe and permanent form of punishment. Other figures face consequences proportional to their level of involvement and responsibility. The nightmare also serves as a warning to those in the physical world who might be tempted to follow similar paths. The preservation of the Church's crimes and their consequences within the nightmare realm ensures that the truth cannot be permanently hidden or forgotten. Future generations are provided with evidence of what happens when human ambition encounters cosmic forces without adequate humility or restraint. For those who enter the nightmare from the physical world, encountering Laurence serves as both a cautionary tale and a test of understanding. The burning First Vicar represents the ultimate consequence of the choices that led to the Church's corruption, and those who face him are forced to confront the reality of what their predecessors' actions have wrought. The battle against Laurence becomes not just a physical confrontation, but a moral reckoning with the legacy of the healing Church. The futility of Laurence's situation in the nightmare also reflects broader themes about the nature of cosmic justice and human responsibility. His eternal suffering cannot undo the harm he has caused, or restore the lives that were lost due to his actions. The punishment serves not as a means of rehabilitation or restitution, but as a form of cosmic bookkeeping that ensures moral debts are acknowledged and paid. The nightmare's preservation of the research hall and its patients serves as another layer of accusation against Laurence and his legacy. The grotesque experiments conducted in the hall were direct extensions of the research philosophy that Laurence had promoted during his leadership of the Church. The suffering patients represent the human cost of the Church's pursuit of knowledge without regard for ethical constraints or the welfare of experimental subjects. The presence of winter lanterns and other cosmic horrors within the nightmare demonstrates that the realm exists on the boundary between human understanding and cosmic reality. These entities serve as reminders that the forces unleashed by the Church's actions extend far beyond human comprehension or control. They represent the alien nature of the justice being dispensed and the cosmic scale of the forces that had been disturbed by human ambition. The nightmare's effect on those who enter it from the physical world also illustrates the continuing influence of the Church's crimes. Even individuals who had no direct involvement in the original atrocities can be affected by the cosmic disturbances that those actions created. The nightmare serves as a zone of infection that can spread the consequences of past crimes to new victims, ensuring that the effects of the Church's actions continue to propagate through time. The architectural elements of the nightmare that mirror locations in the physical world serve to emphasize the connection between the Church's earthly achievements and their cosmic consequences. The grand cathedral that Laurence had built as a monument to the Church's success becomes, in the nightmare, a prison where he suffers eternal punishment. This transformation illustrates how human achievements can be recontextualized and reinterpreted by cosmic forces operating according to logic beyond human understanding. The ultimate message of the hunter's nightmare regarding Laurence and his legacy is one of inevitable cosmic accountability. Despite the Church's attempts to hide their crimes, control their narrative, and maintain their authority, the nightmare ensures that the truth is preserved and that justice is ultimately served. The realm stands as proof that there are consequences for actions that violate the fundamental order of existence, even when those consequences are delayed or operate through mechanisms beyond normal human perception. For Laurence personally, the nightmare represents the complete collapse of every assumption and belief that had guided his life and work. The man who had been convinced that human wisdom and determination could safely harness cosmic forces for beneficial purposes is now proof of the opposite proposition. His eternal suffering serves as a testament to the dangers of hubris and the importance of heeding warnings about forces beyond human understanding or control. Chapter 9. The Legacy of the First Vicar. The influence of Laurence extends far beyond his personal transformation and eternal punishment in the hunter's nightmare. As the founder and first leader of the healing church, his ideas, methods, and fundamental approach to the old blood shaped an institution that would continue to operate for decades after his death, spreading his vision throughout Yharnam and beyond, while simultaneously amplifying and perpetuating the very problems that had led to his downfall. The healing church that survived Laurence's transformation bore little resemblance to the idealistic organization he had originally envisioned. Where he had dreamed of an institution dedicated to healing and human improvement, what remained was a complex bureaucracy, primarily concerned with maintaining its own power and influence. The noble goals that had motivated the church's founding had been gradually displaced by more immediate concerns about political control, resource management, and damage containment. Vicar Amelia, who inherited Laurence's title and position many years after his death, exemplifies both the continuity and the corruption of his legacy. Like her predecessor, Amelia genuinely believed in the divine nature of the old blood and the church's mission to administer it for the benefit of humanity. Her prayers and devotions demonstrated a sincere faith in the principles that Laurence had established. Yet her eventual transformation into a beast during the hunt reveals that she had learned nothing from her predecessor's fate. The reverence shown for Laurence's skull in the Grand Cathedral represents perhaps the most tragic aspect of his legacy. The church had transformed their founder into a religious icon, treating his remains as sacred relics that somehow blessed and legitimized their continued operations. This veneration served to obscure rather than illuminate the lessons that his fate should have taught, allowing subsequent generations of church leaders to repeat his mistakes while believing they were following his example. The prayers that Amelia offers before Laurence's skull reveal the complete perversion of his original message. Instead of heeding the warnings implicit in his transformation, she asks for his blessing on the continued use of blood ministration. The irony is profound. She seeks guidance from the very person whose experience should have taught her to abandon the practices that led to his corruption. This willful blindness to obvious lessons demonstrates how institutions can become trapped by their own mythology and unable to learn from their founders' failures. The The Church's development of increasingly elaborate theological justifications for blood ministration represents another aspect of Laurence's problematic legacy. Where he had originally promoted the old blood based on its obvious practical benefits, later Church doctrine became increasingly abstract and mystical. Complex theological frameworks were developed to explain away the obvious problems with blood ministration while maintaining faith in its ultimate righteousness. These theological developments served multiple purposes for the Church's leadership. They provided intellectual cover for practices that were becoming increasingly difficult to justify on practical grounds. They created barriers to understanding that prevented ordinary believers from questioning Church policies. Most importantly, they allowed Church leaders to maintain their own faith in the righteousness of their cause, despite mounting evidence of its harmful effects. The evolution of the Hunter's Workshop under Church guidance also reflects the transformation of Laurence's legacy over time. What had begun as a practical response to the problems created by blood ministration gradually became an institution primarily concerned with protecting Church interests rather than serving the broader community. The noble ideals that Ludwig had brought to hunting were gradually displaced by more pragmatic concerns about maintaining order and eliminating threats to Church authority. The development of the choir and the School of Mensis as competing factions within the broader Church hierarchy demonstrates how Laurence's original unified vision fragmented over time. These organizations, while nominally serving the same institutional goals, pursued radically different approaches to understanding and utilizing cosmic forces. Their rivalry and competition often worked against the Church's stated mission, while consuming resources and attention that might have been better directed towards solving fundamental problems. The choir's research into communication with Great Ones represents a direct continuation of Laurence's original interest in harnessing cosmic forces for human benefit. However, their methods and goals had evolved far beyond anything Laurence had originally envisioned. Where he had focused on the practical medical applications of the old blood, the choir pursued abstract communion with alien intelligences whose motivations and methods were entirely beyond human comprehension. The School of Mensis took this evolution even further, pursuing contact with cosmic forces through methods that bordered on summoning and demon worship. Mikolash's obsession with achieving communication with Great Ones led him to abandon any pretense of serving human welfare in favor of pursuing cosmic knowledge for its own sake. His eventual fate, trapped in his own nightmare construct while his physical body mummified, serves as another example of how Laurence's original vision was corrupted by successive generations of followers. The Church's relationship with other institutions and organizations also reflects the problematic aspects of Laurence's legacy. The conflict with the Vile Bloods of Cainhurst, while ostensibly about competing approaches to blood usage, was fundamentally about power and control, rather than genuine theological or medical differences. The Church's use of the executioners to eliminate the Vile Bloods demonstrates how far the institution had moved from its original healing mission towards simple political domination. The Church's treatment of Old Yharnam following the Beast Plague outbreak there reveals another dimension of Laurence's problematic legacy. Rather than attempting to help the infected residents or find solutions to their condition, the Church chose to quarantine the entire district and burn it to eliminate the threat. This response prioritized institutional survival over human welfare and demonstrated how completely the Church had abandoned its original commitment to healing and helping those in need. Jura's rebellion against this approach and his eventual establishment of a sanctuary for the remaining beasts in Old Yharnam represents a rejection of the Church's corrupted interpretation of Laurence's legacy. The retired hunter's decision to protect rather than eliminate the transformed residents reflects a return to the original idealistic principles that had motivated the Church's founding. His actions serve as a reminder of what the Church might have become if it had remained true to its founder's noble intentions. The development of blood ministration techniques and applications over the decades following Laurence's death shows how his original medical innovations were gradually perverted into something far more dangerous and exploitative. What had begun as careful, controlled treatments administered by trained professionals evolved into widespread distribution of increasingly potent blood preparations with minimal oversight or safety precautions. The Church's establishment of blood collection and processing facilities throughout Yharnam created an industrial infrastructure dedicated to the mass production and distribution of old blood-based treatments. This industrialization of what had originally been a careful medical procedure removed much of the personalized attention and safety monitoring that had characterized Laurence's early work. The focus shifted from patient welfare to production efficiency, with predictable consequences for safety and effectiveness. The social and cultural changes that the Church promoted in Yharnam society also reflect both the positive and negative aspects of Laurence's legacy. The emphasis on communal worship and shared ritual created strong social bonds and provided meaning and purpose for many citizens. However, the Church's growing political influence also created pressure for conformity and discouraged questioning or criticism of Church policies. The Night of the Hunt, which became a regular occurrence in Yharnam, represents the institutionalization of violence as a solution to the problems created by the Church's own policies. These organized hunts served multiple purposes. They provided an outlet for community fear and anger, demonstrated the Church's continued relevance and power, and eliminated threats to Church authority. However, they also normalized violence and created a culture where killing was seen as an acceptable first resort rather than a last option. The psychological impact of regular hunts on Yharnam's population cannot be overstated. Citizens were required to participate in or at least support organized campaigns to kill their neighbors, friends, and family members who had undergone beast transformation. This requirement created trauma, paranoia, and social fragmentation that undermined the community bonds that the Church claimed to support. The Church's development of increasingly sophisticated propaganda and indoctrination techniques also represents an evolution from Laurence's original approach, where he had relied primarily on demonstrable results to build support for blood ministration. Later, Church leaders invested heavily in messaging, symbolism, and ritual designed to maintain faith even when practical results were disappointing or harmful. The architectural legacy of the Church, particularly the expansion and elaboration of the Grand Cathedral, serves as a physical manifestation of how Laurence's vision was both honored and corrupted by his successors. The magnificent building that grew from his original modest structure represents the institutional success that his innovations had made possible. However, the increasingly elaborate and intimidating design also reflects the Church's transformation from a healing organization into an institution, primarily concerned with projecting power and authority. The preservation and display of various relics and artifacts within the cathedral creates a museum-like atmosphere that transforms the Church's history into objects of veneration rather than sources of learning. Laurence's skull, the various blood-related artifacts, and the elaborate ceremonial objects serve to create an atmosphere of mystical reverence that discourages critical examination of the Church's actual track record and effectiveness. The Church's influence on education and intellectual development in Yharnam also reflects the mixed nature of Laurence's legacy. On one hand, the Church supported scholarship, research, and learning in ways that genuinely advanced human knowledge and capability. On the other hand, the institution's growing orthodoxy and intolerance for dissent gradually constrained intellectual freedom and discouraged the kind of independent thinking that had originally led to breakthrough discoveries. The fate of scholars and researchers who questioned Church doctrine or proposed alternative approaches demonstrates how the institution that had emerged from Laurence's rebellion against orthodoxy had itself become a source of intellectual oppression. The irony is particularly bitter, given Laurence's own history as a scholar who had challenged his master's teachings in pursuit of what he believed was a better approach. The international reputation and influence of the healing Church during its height represents the global scope of Laurence's impact. Pilgrims and patients traveled to Yharnam from distant lands, seeking the benefits of blood ministration, spreading knowledge of the Church's methods and philosophy throughout the known world. This international influence amplified both the positive and negative aspects of Laurence's innovations. The gradual decline of the Church's effectiveness and authority in its later years reflects the inevitable collapse of an institution built on fundamentally flawed premises. Despite decades of effort, resources, and innovation, the Church never succeeded in solving the basic problems that Laurence's original blood ministration had created. The beast scourge continued to spread. Transformations became more common and severe, and the institution's credibility gradually eroded as its failures became impossible to hide or explain away. The final irony of Laurence's legacy lies in how completely his original vision was vindicated by its own failure. Willem's warnings about the dangers of the old blood proved prophetic in every detail, while Laurence's confidence in his ability to safely harness cosmic forces was revealed to be tragically misplaced. Yet this vindication came too late to prevent the enormous suffering and destruction that resulted from pursuing the wrong path for so long. The story of Laurence's legacy serves as a case study in how good intentions can lead to catastrophic outcomes when they encounter forces beyond human understanding or control. His genuine desire to help humanity and his remarkable early successes created momentum for an institutional trajectory that ultimately led to widespread harm and suffering. The Church that carried his name and claimed to follow his example became a source of the very problems it was supposed to solve. Understanding Laurence's legacy is crucial for understanding the broader themes of Bloodborne's narrative. His story illustrates how human ambition and cosmic forces can interact in ways that produce outcomes far different from those intended by the original actors. It demonstrates the importance of humility and caution when dealing with powers beyond human comprehension, and the dangers of allowing institutional momentum to override critical thinking and moral reflection. The First Vicar's ultimate legacy is thus a complex mixture of inspiration and warning. His original vision of using knowledge and innovation to improve human existence remains admirable and worth pursuing. However, his fate and the consequences of his actions serve as a permanent reminder of the need for wisdom, restraint, and respect for forces that operate according to logic beyond human understanding or control. Chapter 10: Reflections on Ambition and Cosmic Horror. As we reach the conclusion of our journey through the life and legacy of Laurence, the First Vicar, it becomes clear that his story serves as far more than just the biography of a single character within Bloodborne's intricate narrative. Instead, Laurence's tale functions as a profound meditation on the nature of human ambition, the dangers of cosmic exploration, and the tragic irony that often accompanies our most noble intentions when they encounter forces beyond our comprehension. The arc of Laurence's existence, from idealistic scholar to church founder, to monstrous beast to eternally burning phantom, traces a complete cycle of human aspiration and cosmic consequence. His transformation represents not just a personal tragedy, but a universal warning about the hubris that drives humanity to reach beyond its natural limitations without adequate preparation or understanding of the forces being unleashed. At its heart, Laurence's story is about the corruption of knowledge and the perversion of healing. The man who began his career dedicated to alleviating human suffering ultimately became responsible for creating new and more terrible forms of suffering that persisted long after his own death. This transformation was not the result of evil intentions or moral weakness, but rather emerged from the interaction between noble goals and cosmic forces that operated according to logic, entirely alien to human understanding. The relationship between Laurence and Master Willem serves as a framework for understanding the broader themes of the narrative. Willem's cautious approach to cosmic knowledge, symbolized by his warning to fear the old blood, represents one possible response to encounters with forces beyond human comprehension. His emphasis on gaining insight and understanding before attempting to manipulate or utilize cosmic power reflects a recognition of humanity's limitations and the need for humility when dealing with such forces. Laurence's more aggressive approach, by contrast, represents the human tendency to focus on immediate practical benefits without adequate consideration of long-term consequences or underlying dangers. His confidence in his ability to safely harness the old blood's power reflects a fundamentally anthropocentric worldview that assumes human intelligence and determination can overcome any obstacle or danger. The tragedy of their conflict lies not in any fundamental moral difference between the two men, but in their different assessments of risk and their different approaches to the unknown. Both Willem and Laurence genuinely wanted to benefit humanity and advance human knowledge. Their disagreements centered on questions of method and timing rather than ultimate goals. Yet this seemingly academic dispute had consequences that extended far beyond the scholarly realm and ultimately affected the fate of an entire civilization. The healing church that emerged from Laurence's vision serves as a case study in how institutions can evolve in ways that contradict their founding principles. What began as a genuine effort to provide healing and improvement gradually transformed into a complex bureaucracy primarily concerned with maintaining its own power and authority. This institutional evolution was not the result of conscious corruption or deliberate abandonment of original values, but rather emerged from the practical pressures of dealing with the unintended consequences of the Church's core activities. The beast scourge that plagued Yharnam represents more than just a medical or public health crisis. It serves as a metaphor for the unintended consequences of technological and scientific advancement more generally. The same old blood that provided miraculous healing also carried within it the seeds of transformation and corruption. This duality reflects the double-edged nature of many human innovations, which often carry both tremendous benefits and hidden dangers that only become apparent over time. The Church's response to the beast scourge, attempting to manage its consequences rather than addressing its root causes, illustrates a common pattern in human institutional behavior. Once organizations become committed to particular approaches or technologies, they often prefer to address problems through additional complexity and control, rather than abandoning or fundamentally revising their core strategies. This institutional inertia can perpetuate and amplify problems, even when their causes are well understood. The hunter's workshop and the culture of hunting that developed around it represent another dimension of how Laurence's original vision was corrupted over time. What began as a practical response to a specific problem gradually evolved into an institution with its own values, traditions, and interests that often conflicted with the Church's stated mission. The hunters who were supposed to protect society from the consequences of blood ministration became, in many cases, victims of the same forces they were fighting against. Ludwig's transformation from noble hunter to monstrous beast serves as a particularly poignant example of how even the most sincere and dedicated individuals could be corrupted by the system they served. His fate illustrates that good intentions and strong character are not sufficient protection against cosmic forces that operate according to logic beyond human understanding. The very blood that gave him the strength to serve others ultimately destroyed his humanity and transformed him into a threat to those he had sworn to protect. The atrocities committed at the fishing hamlet represent the nadir of the Church's moral decline and illustrate how institutional pressures can lead even good people to participate in unconscionable actions. The scholars and hunters who participated in the hamlet's destruction were not inherently evil individuals, but rather were caught up in institutional dynamics that gradually normalized and justified increasingly extreme actions in service of supposedly noble goals. The cosmic justice represented by the hunter's nightmare serves as a reminder that there are moral laws operating in the universe that transcend human institutions and human understanding. The nightmare's existence demonstrates that actions have consequences that extend beyond the physical realm and beyond human awareness. The eternal punishment suffered by Laurence and his compatriots illustrates that cosmic justice operates according to principles that may be very different from human notions of fairness or proportionality. Yet the nightmare also serves as a source of hope, in that it demonstrates that truth cannot be permanently hidden and that justice will ultimately be served, even if that justice operates through mechanisms beyond human understanding or control. The preservation of the fishing hamlet within the nightmare ensures that the truth about the church's crimes cannot be forgotten or denied, regardless of attempts to suppress or rewrite history. The role of Great Ones throughout Laurence's story serves as a reminder of humanity's place within a much larger cosmic order. These alien intelligences operate according to motivations and logic that are fundamentally incomprehensible to human minds. Their influence on human affairs is neither benevolent nor malevolent in any human sense, but rather reflects the operation of cosmic forces that exist on scales and according to principles that transcend human categories of understanding. The old blood itself serves as a symbol of the ambiguous nature of cosmic gifts. Its healing properties were genuine and provided real benefits to those who received it, yet it also carried within it influences and tendencies that ultimately proved destructive to human civilization. This duality reflects the complex nature of contact with cosmic forces. Such contact may provide genuine benefits, but it also inevitably involves risks and consequences that cannot be fully predicted or controlled. The concept of insight that runs throughout Bloodborne's narrative serves as another lens for understanding Laurence's story. Insight represents knowledge and understanding that comes at a cost. The more one learns about cosmic truth, the more one becomes alienated from ordinary human existence. Laurence's tragedy can be understood as the result of gaining too much insight too quickly, without the wisdom or preparation necessary to handle such knowledge safely. Willem's approach of seeking insight gradually and carefully, while developing the wisdom necessary to handle cosmic knowledge, represents a more sustainable approach to transcendence. However, his fate, becoming a mute, mushroom-covered figure trapped in contemplation, suggests that even the most careful approach to cosmic knowledge carries risks and costs that may ultimately prove unacceptable. The theme of eyes that appears throughout the narrative serves as a metaphor for different types of knowledge and understanding. The eyes on the inside that Willem promoted represent a form of cosmic perception that allows individuals to see beyond ordinary human limitations. However, the development of such perception comes at the cost of normal human consciousness and social connection. The choice between gaining cosmic insight and maintaining human identity represents one of the fundamental dilemmas explored in Laurence's story. The architectural elements that appear throughout the narrative, the Grand Cathedral, the Research Hall, the Hunter's Workshop, serve as physical manifestations of different approaches to cosmic knowledge and power. These structures represent human attempts to create controlled environments for dealing with cosmic forces, yet they ultimately prove inadequate to contain or control the powers they were designed to channel. The various weapons and tools developed by the Church and its hunters serve as metaphors for humanity's attempts to assert control over forces beyond their understanding. The trick weapons that transform to meet different challenges represent human adaptability and ingenuity, yet even the most sophisticated weapons prove inadequate against truly cosmic threats. The ultimate ineffectiveness of human tools against cosmic forces serves as another reminder of humanity's limitations and the need for humility when dealing with such powers. The role of ritual and ceremony throughout the Church's operations serves as an example of how human institutions attempt to create meaning and control in the face of incomprehensible forces. The elaborate rituals surrounding blood ministration serve both practical and psychological functions, helping to create a sense of order and purpose around activities that were ultimately chaotic and unpredictable. The corruption of language and meaning that occurs throughout the Church's evolution illustrates how institutions can gradually lose sight of their original purposes through the accumulation of small compromises and rationalizations. Terms like healing and ministry gradually acquired new meanings that bore little resemblance to their original definitions, allowing the Church to maintain its self-image as a beneficial institution, even as its actual effects became increasingly harmful. The persistence of Laurence's influence long after his death demonstrates how ideas and institutions can take on lives of their own that extend far beyond their creator's intentions or control. The Church that claimed to follow his example bore little resemblance to his original vision, yet his name and legacy continue to provide legitimacy for actions he would have found abhorrent. The ultimate message of Laurence's story is both warning and invitation. It serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of cosmic exploration without adequate preparation, wisdom, and humility. Yet it also represents an acknowledgement that such exploration is an inevitable part of human nature, and that the quest for knowledge and improvement, despite its risks, remains a fundamentally noble endeavor. The tragedy of Laurence lies not in his decision to pursue cosmic knowledge, but in his failure to appreciate the full implications of what he was attempting. His story suggests that contact with cosmic forces is not inherently good or evil, but rather represents a fundamental challenge that requires the highest levels of wisdom, preparation, and moral reflection to navigate safely. For those who encounter Laurence's story, whether in the burning cathedral of the Hunter's Nightmare or in the veneration of his skull in the Grand Cathedral, his fate serves as both inspiration and warning. His original vision of using knowledge and power to benefit humanity remains worthy of pursuit, but his tragic end reminds us that such pursuits must be undertaken with the deepest respect for forces beyond our understanding and the humility to acknowledge our own limitations. And so concludes our deep dive into the tragic tale of Laurence the First Vicar. We've discovered how a brilliant scholar's noble intentions became the foundation for cosmic horror, how healing became corruption, and how the pursuit of transcendence led to damnation. The legacy of Laurence continues to burn in the nightmare realm, an eternal reminder of the price of hubris and the dangerous allure of forbidden knowledge. Next time on Lore 2 RPG, we'll explore another tragic figure from the cosmic horror canon. Until then, keep exploring those epic tales, fellow adventurers, and remember, sometimes the greatest horrors emerge not from evil intentions, but from the corruption of our most noble dreams. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the lore of Laurence, the First Vicar. If you enjoyed this exploration of Bloodborne's tragic founding father, please like this video and subscribe to Lore 2 RPG for more in-depth gaming lore content. Your support helps us continue creating these comprehensive analyses of gaming's greatest stories.